Chosen one, you were not randomly scrolling when this message found you. There was intention behind the timing. There was purpose behind the pause that brought your eyes to these words. You may think you simply clicked on another video, another message, another voice in a crowded digital world. But heaven does not operate in coincidence. You were led here because something shifted today. What you did may have felt small. It may have felt weak. It may have felt almost embarrassing in its simplicity. Perhaps you prayed when you felt nothing. Perhaps you forgave when your pride wanted revenge. Perhaps you chose silence instead of reaction. Perhaps you simply got out of bed and tried again when yesterday left you exhausted. To you it felt ordinary. To heaven it was a prophetic trigger. God's laughter was not sarcasm, it was not dismissal. It was the deep, warm laughter of assurance. The kind of laughter that comes from knowing the ending of the story while you are still in the middle of the chapter. Heaven reacted with joy because your obedience aligned with a design you cannot yet see. In this message, we are going to uncover why heaven responded the way it did. We will explore what God saw in your action that you could not see in yourself, and we will connect that small moment to the breakthrough that is already forming around your life. Before we go deeper, take a moment to engage. Like this message, if something inside you feels stirred, subscribe if you know you are walking through a divine process, and in the comments declare the word seen. Let it be your confession, I am seen by heaven. Now let us go deeper. We are often our own harshest critics. You replay your failures in high definition. You magnify your delays. You measure your life against timelines you created or absorbed from others. You compare your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel and conclude that you are late, lacking, or less than. But what if the measurement tool you're using was never designed for divine evaluation? You judge yourself by outcomes. God evaluates by obedience. You judge yourself by speed. God evaluates by direction. You judge yourself by visible results. God evaluates by invisible transformation. This is why you often misinterpret your own progress. You see weakness when you hesitate before stepping forward. God sees courage because you stepped anyway. You see inconsistency because you are not perfect every day. God sees persistence because you keep returning. You see slow growth because the fruit is not yet visible. God sees roots growing deeper beneath the surface. The human perspective is limited by sight. The divine perspective is anchored in completion. Isaiah 55, 8-9 declares that his thoughts are not your thoughts, and his ways are not your ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are his ways higher than yours. This is not poetic exaggeration. It is a recalibration of perception. When you say I am behind, God may be saying you are right on time. When you say this is too small, God may be saying this is foundational. When you say I failed again, God may be saying you're learning resilience. Consider how often you dismiss your own obedience because it did not feel dramatic. You think transformation must arrive with thunder. You think breakthrough must feel explosive. But many of heaven's greatest movements begin quietly. A whispered prayer, a restrained reaction, a private surrender, a decision to try again. From your vantage point, these moments seem unimpressive, but heaven measures depth differently. What feels small to you may be spiritually seismic. Think about seeds. When a seed is placed into soil, nothing appears to happen. There is no applause, no visible expansion, no celebration. But beneath the surface, life is breaking open. Structures are forming, roots are reaching, strength is building in silence. If you judge the seed after one day, you would call it buried. Heaven calls it planted. This is where perspective divides the discouraged from the steady. You've been evaluating yourself from the surface. God has been evaluating you from the soil. You see the dust of your current season. He sees the gold being refined within it. You see repetition. He sees reinforcement. You see delay. He sees development. And here is what you must understand. Nothing done in faith is ever wasted. Faith does not operate on immediate feedback. Faith operates on alignment. When you choose obedience, even without emotional confirmation, you align yourself with a reality that is larger than your present feelings. Heaven measures progress by agreement with purpose. The world says progress is promotion. Heaven says progress is surrender. The world says progress is visibility. Heaven says progress is faithfulness. The world says progress is acceleration. Heaven says progress is endurance. You may not feel impressive, but heaven is not impressed by spectacle. Heaven responds to sincerity. When you chose today to respond differently than you would have a year ago, that was growth. When you resisted a thought that once dominated you, that was growth. When you kept believing after disappointment, that was growth. You may not have crossed a finish line, but you took a step, and heaven celebrates steps. The difference between Earth's measurement and heaven's measurement is this. Earth rewards outcomes, heaven rewards obedience. On earth, applause is delayed until success is visible. In heaven, joy erupts the moment faith is exercised. You're not as behind as you think. You're not as weak as you feel. You're not as unnoticed as you fear. Heaven's perspective sees trajectory. It sees pattern. It sees intention. It sees the internal shifts that precede external manifestations. Sometimes you think nothing is changing because your circumstances look similar. But God often transforms identity before environment. He strengthens character before platform. He stabilizes the foundation before increasing the height. If He gave you the visible breakthrough before completing the invisible development, the weight would crush you. So when you look at your life and think this feels slow, understand that slow does not mean stagnant. Slow often means strategic. God is not reacting to your timeline. He is orchestrating according to His. What you labeled insignificant may have been perfectly timed obedience. That moment you almost ignored. It may have aligned you with protection you cannot see. That small yes, it may have shifted a sequence of events forming ahead of you. Heaven's vantage point includes tomorrow. Yours does not. This is why you must learn to trust divine evaluation over self-criticism. When you condemn yourself for not doing more, ask, instead, did I obey? When you feel discouraged because results are not visible, ask instead, did I remain faithful? When you compare your pace to someone else's journey arc instead, am I aligned? Because heaven does not measure you against other people. Heaven measures you against purpose, and purpose unfolds step by step. Your progress is not defined by speed, but by surrender. You're growing in ways you cannot quantify. You're becoming in ways you cannot yet articulate. You're stabilizing in places that once shook you. That is not small, that is sacred. And when you begin to see yourself through heaven's eyes, self-doubt loses its authority. Comparison loses its grip. Discouragement loses its narrative. Because you realize that the King is not disappointed in your process. He delights in it. He sees the trembling hand that still reaches. He sees the tired heart that still hopes. He sees the imperfect effort that still tries. And from heaven's perspective, that is progress. So stop measuring your life with a ruler designed for earthly applause. Lift your eyes. Recalibrate your view. Align your evaluation with heaven's. Because when heaven measures you, it does not see failure. It sees formation. It sees movement. It sees obedience, and it rejoices. And when you begin to understand how heaven measures you, you're ready to understand something even deeper. The meaning of God's holy laughter over your life. Because when Scripture speaks of God laughing, it is never careless, never shallow, never random. It is a sound that echoes with authority. It is a declaration wrapped in joy. It is heaven's response to a reality that earth has not yet recognized. Psalm 2:4 says, "He who sits in the heavens laughs." That laughter is not mockery. It is not sarcasm. It is not the laughter of indifference. It is the laughter of supremacy. It is the laughter of a king who sees every scheme formed against his purposes and knows with unshakable certainty that none of them will stand. When the enemy plots, God is not anxious. When darkness strategizes, heaven is not pacing. When pressure rises around you, the throne of God remains steady, and that steadiness sometimes expresses itself as laughter. Not because your struggle is funny, but because your outcome is secure. Imagine watching a chess match where one player believes they are cornering the king, unaware that in 3 moves the game is already decided. The master player is not sweating. He is not scrambling. He sees the board from above. He knows the ending before the opponent even understands the present position. That is the tone of Psalm 2:4. God laughs because he sees the end. But there is another context where Scripture reveals divine joy, and it is far more intimate. Zephaniah 3:17 declares that the Lord rejoices over you with singing. He quiets you with his love. He exults over you with loud singing. This is not cosmic dominance. This is relational delight. This is not laughter at enemies. This is laughter over a child. And today the emphasis is not merely that God laughs at opposition, it is that he delights in you. You must let that settle in your spirit. God delights in you, not when you are flawless, not when you are impressive, not when you are applauded by crowds. He delights in you when you try. He delights in you when you choose him. He delights in you when your obedience wobbles but does not withdraw. Think about a parent watching a toddler take their first steps. The child is unstable. Their legs tremble, they fall more than they stand. But when they take even one step forward, the parent does not critique their posture. The parent does not demand perfection. The parent erupts with joy. Why? Because movement matters more than mastery. Progress matters more than polish. The parent is not measuring the child against Olympic standards. The parent is celebrating growth. This is the posture of heaven toward you. When you forgave that person, even though your heart still felt raw, heaven celebrated. When you resisted that temptation, even though it would have been easier to give in, heaven celebrated. When you prayed with doubt still lingering in your mind, heaven celebrated. Because God celebrates progress, not perfection. Perfection is a finished state. Progress is a living process, and heaven is invested in your process. You may think, "But I still struggle." Heaven says, "But you are still trying." You may say, "I almost gave up." Heaven says, "But you didn't." You may say, "It was messy." Heaven says, "It was movement." This is what holy laughter sounds like. It is the joy of a father watching his child grow stronger, braver, more aligned, even if the steps are small. Every small act of obedience sends a signal through the unseen realm. When you choose light over darkness, even privately, it disrupts the influence of darkness. When you speak truth in a moment where silence would have protected your pride, it shifts something. When you worship in weakness, it testifies that your faith is not dependent on comfort. Heaven responds to that. The angels are not bored by your ordinary day. They are attentive to your choices. They rejoice not only over massive revivals, but over one heart that refuses to quit. Over one believer who keeps saying yes. Over one chosen one who keeps standing. And that joy is not fragile. It is rooted in confidence. God's laughter over you carries assurance. It says, "I see what this will become. You may not yet see the harvest. You may not yet see the ripple effect, but heaven sees trajectory. You are not just a collection of isolated decisions. You are a pattern in formation." When you repeatedly choose obedience in small ways, you are forming spiritual momentum, and heaven recognizes momentum. The enemy fears consistency more than intensity. He fears the believer who quietly shows up every day. He fears the chosen one who keeps returning to faith even after disappointment. Because small obedience repeated becomes unshakable alignment, and alignment unlocks acceleration. This is why God's joy over you is not sentimental, it is strategic. He rejoices because your growth is evidence that His Spirit is active within you. He rejoices because your yes is building strength you do not yet realize you carry. He rejoices because every time you rise again, you become harder to defeat. And this leads us into something powerful. Your survival itself is victory. Because the enemy did not intend for you to still be here. He did not plan for you to still believe. He did not design his attacks expecting you to remain standing. The discouragement, the betrayal, the exhaustion, the delay, none of it was random. It was layered. It was calculated. The goal was not merely to inconvenience you. The goal was to silence you, to wear you down gradually, to convince you that quitting would be easier than continuing. And yet here you are, breathing, listening, seeking, hoping. That is not small, that is defiance. Psalm 118:17 says, "I shall not die, but live and declare the works of the Lord." That verse is not poetic optimism. It is warfare language. It is a declaration that survival is testimony. You are living proof that the plan formed against you did not succeed. The storm did not erase you. The mistake did not define you. The delay did not destroy you. The disappointment did not silence you. You're still here, and every breath is evidence that grace overpowered opposition. Do not underestimate what it took for you to still be standing. You may look at yourself and think you are barely holding on. Heaven looks at you and sees resilience forged in fire. Your continued faith is not passive, it is active resistance. Every time you choose praise instead of complaint, you are pushing back against despair. Every time you choose prayer instead of surrendering to hopelessness, you're engaging in spiritual warfare. Every time you choose to trust again after being hurt, you are breaking cycles that tried to imprison you. The enemy expected erosion. Instead, he encountered endurance. And heaven laughs again, not at your pain, but at the failure of what tried to bury you. Your survival is not accidental. It is sustained. There were moments you did not even realize how close you were to collapse. There were days when strength felt absent, yet something carried you through. That something was not luck, it was preservation. You were upheld. And being upheld is victory. Victory is not always loud. Sometimes victory looks like waking up and trying again. Sometimes victory looks like staying when leaving would have been easier. Sometimes victory looks like whispering one more prayer when your voice feels thin. You think victory must look like public triumph. Heaven often defines it as private perseverance. The enemy measures success by whether he can make you quit. Heaven measures victory by whether you remain. And you have remained. That alone dismantles more darkness than you know. The fact that you are still sensitive to God's voice means your heart has not hardened. The fact that you still desire alignment means your spirit is alive. The fact that you still feel conviction means you are not numb. That is evidence of spiritual vitality. Hell does not fear the perfect believer. Hell fears the persistent one. It fears the chosen one who gets back up. The one who still sings through tears. The one who still prays when answers delay. The one who still forgives when revenge would be justified. Because persistence multiplies. Every act of perseverance compounds. It builds spiritual muscle. It creates depth. It stabilizes identity. It strengthens trust. And heaven celebrates this, not because you're invincible, but because you are faithful. Your faith does not have to feel strong to be strong, it only has to remain. Even trembling faith counts, even exhausted obedience counts, even quiet hope counts. Your continued faith is already a win. You're not waiting for victory, you're walking in it. It may not yet look like the breakthrough you imagine, it may not yet feel like arrival, but the fact that you did not surrender to the narrative of defeat means you are already operating from victory. God's laughter over you carries two messages at once. First, the enemy's plans are limited. Second, your growth is undeniable. You are further than you think, stronger than you feel, more aligned than you realize. And heaven is not waiting for you to become impressive. It is already rejoicing because you're becoming steadfast. So when doubt whispers that today was insignificant, remember, this heaven does not celebrate spectacle, it celebrates faith. When discouragement tries to convince you that nothing changed, remember this survival is evidence of sustaining grace. When comparison tempts you to shrink back, remember this. Heaven is not comparing you to anyone else, it is delighting in your growth. You are not just surviving, you are advancing. And if God is laughing in joy over your progress, then your story is far from finished. It is unfolding exactly where it needs to. Keep standing, keep choosing, keep believing, because every shaky step still moves you forward, and heaven is still rejoicing. And as you continue walking in this awareness that heaven rejoices over your growth and your survival is already victory, you're ready to understand something even more disruptive to the enemy's strategy. Small obedience carries eternal weight. The enemy thrives on exaggeration. He exaggerates your failures, he exaggerates your delays, and he also exaggerates what qualifies as significant. He whispers that unless you are doing something dramatic, visible, and publicly validated, it does not matter. He wants you to believe that if your obedience does not trend, it does not count. But the kingdom of God does not operate by volume, it operates by alignment. In the world system, impact is measured by scale. In God's system, impact is measured by obedience. Jesus said in Matthew 17:20 that if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, nothing will be impossible for you. Notice what he did not say. He did not say you need mountain-sized faith to move mountains. He did not say you need flawless confidence. He said a mustard seed. A mustard seed is not impressive. It is not large. It is not visually commanding. It is small enough to overlook, small enough to drop unnoticed, small enough to dismiss. Yet within that small seed is coded potential. This is how the kingdom works. God hides immense power inside small beginnings. When you whisper a prayer in your kitchen while no one is watching, you may feel foolish. But heaven does not measure decibels. Heaven measures sincerity. That quiet prayer becomes agreement with divine will, and agreement shifts atmospheres. When you choose to forgive someone who does not deserve it, your flesh may scream that it changes nothing. But forgiveness is not merely emotional release, it is spiritual authority. It severs legal ground the enemy tries to stand on. One act of forgiveness can close a door that has been open in a family line for generations. You think you are just choosing peace. Heaven knows you are breaking cycles. When you resist a temptation privately when no one would have known if you gave in, that resistance is not small. It is a declaration that your allegiance belongs elsewhere. It strengthens your identity. It fortifies your spirit. It weakens patterns that once controlled you. The enemy wants you to believe only platforms matter. God is building pillars. Platforms elevate visibility. Pillars sustain weight. Small obedience builds pillars. Think about how often Scripture reveals God moving through what seemed insignificant. A shepherd boy with a sling, a widow with 2 coins, a lunch of 5 loaves and 2 fish. None of these looked impressive in human hands, but placed in alignment with God they multiplied. Small obedience activates multiplication. The enemy fears your consistency more than your charisma. He fears your daily yes more than your occasional intensity. Because small obedience repeated becomes spiritual momentum, and momentum cannot be easily stopped. Consider the idea of generational chains, patterns of fear, patterns of anger, patterns of poverty thinking, patterns of self-sabotage. These patterns are not broken in dramatic single moments alone. They are dismantled through repeated small decisions. The day you choose therapy instead of denial. The day you choose prayer instead of panic. The day you choose to speak life instead of repeating inherited negativity. You may not see fireworks, but you are altering trajectory. Heaven sees trajectory. You are not just making isolated decisions, you are shifting inheritance. Your small obedience becomes a new reference point for those who come after you. What you normalize in righteousness becomes easier for someone else to sustain. This is why small obedience carries eternal weight. It is not about the size of the act, it is about the alignment of the heart. A quiet yes in the dark carries more eternal weight than a loud performance done for approval. And here is something deeper. Small obedience shapes you internally before it transforms anything externally. Every time you choose faith over fear, your spiritual muscles strengthen. Every time you respond with grace instead of ego, your character deepens. Every time you surrender control, instead of forcing outcomes, trust expands. These internal shifts may not be photographed, they may not be applauded, but they are forming the architecture of your destiny. Destiny is not built in one spectacular decision. It is constructed in thousands of small obediences. The enemy hopes you will grow bored with the small things. He hopes you will despise the hidden season. He hopes you will abandon consistency because it does not feel dramatic. But heaven is watching the small things. Heaven is recording the small things. Heaven is multiplying the small things. And as you begin to understand the weight of small obedience, you are ready to embrace another truth that liberates you from performance. God celebrates the process. The world celebrates results. It claps for the promotion. It highlights the breakthrough. It reposts the success. It acknowledges the arrival. But the world is rarely present in the middle chapters. It does not applaud the late nights of discipline. It does not honor the quiet seasons of preparation. But God does. Psalm 37:23-24 says, "The steps of a righteous person are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in their way. Though they fall, they shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholds them with his hand." Notice the language. He delights in your steps, not only your destination, not only your achievement, your steps. God delights in movement. You may look at your journey and see inconsistency. God sees direction. You may see stumbles. God sees recovery. You may see a path that feels longer than expected. God sees a route that is forming endurance. The process is not a delay from destiny. The process is the development required for destiny. If God handed you the full manifestation of your promise without shaping your internal capacity, the weight would overwhelm you. Character is what sustains calling. This is why heaven celebrates faithfulness more than flash. Hebrews 6:10 says, "God is not unjust to forget your work and the love you have shown him." That means nothing you have done in sincerity is lost in divine memory. Every unseen sacrifice is recorded. The time you chose integrity when compromise would have accelerated your success. The season you remained faithful when visibility decreased. The prayers you prayed for others without public acknowledgement. Heaven remembers. You may forget your own quiet acts. God does not. Human applause is fragile. It fluctuates with opinion, it fades with time, it shifts with trends. but heaven's approval is anchored in truth. It does not depend on popularity, it depends on alignment. When you live for human applause, your emotions will fluctuate with feedback. When you live for heaven's delight, your stability increases, because heaven's applause is not loud, but it is lasting. There is a freedom that comes when you stop needing to be seen by people because you know you are seen by God. There is a strength that emerges when your validation is not dependent on external affirmation. Faithfulness in secret builds confidence in public. You do not need to broadcast every sacrifice. You do not need to advertise every discipline. You do not need to prove your devotion. The God who sees in secret rewards openly in his timing. And timing matters. God's celebration of the process means you do not have to rush to the finish line. You can walk steadily, you can breathe, you can grow at the pace of transformation rather than the pace of comparison. The process is where your intimacy deepens. It is where your discernment sharpens. It is where your resilience strengthens. If you skip the process, you skip the formation, and heaven delights in formation. The steps you take today, even if they feel repetitive, are building stability. The quiet obedience you practice daily is constructing identity. The prayers that feel unanswered are stretching your trust. You are not behind, you are becoming, and heaven celebrates becoming. The world will often misunderstand your process. It may misinterpret your boundaries. It may not see your growth because it measures by external metrics. But God measures by transformation. And transformation is rarely loud. So when you feel unnoticed, remember, faithfulness in secret is recorded in heaven. When you feel tempted to compare your chapter 3 to someone else's chapter 10, remember God delights in your steps, not their timeline. When you feel discouraged because applause is absent, remember heaven's approval outweighs every human opinion. You are not performing for a crowd, you are walking with a Father, and that Father delights in every step toward him. Small obedience activates big spiritual outcomes. Faithfulness in secret is recorded in heaven, and the process you're in right now is not a pause. It is preparation. Keep walking, keep choosing, keep trusting, because heaven is not waiting to celebrate you at the finish line. Heaven is already celebrating you in the middle of the journey. And now, after understanding that small obedience carries eternal weight and that God celebrates the process you are faced with, something deeply practical, how you should respond. Because revelation without response becomes inspiration without transformation. And you are not here merely to feel encouraged, you are here to be aligned. The first shift must happen internally. You must stop underestimating your obedience. You've spent too long dismissing your progress because it did not look dramatic. You've minimized your growth because it did not come with applause. You've downplayed your resilience because it did not feel heroic. But what if the very things you've been calling small are the pillars holding up your future? When you choose integrity in a conversation no one else will remember, that is obedience. When you resist the urge to react in anger, that is obedience. When you show up again despite fatigue, that is obedience. These are not minor details. These are spiritual investments. Stop treating your obedience like it is accidental. It is intentional alignment. And once you stop underestimating your obedience, you must confront something else that has quietly shaped your emotions, the habit of living for human validation. You may not admit it openly, but part of you still looks for confirmation from people. You want someone to notice your effort. You want someone to affirm your sacrifice. You want someone to acknowledge your growth. There is nothing wrong with appreciation. But when validation becomes oxygen, instability follows. Because people are inconsistent, their applause fluctuates, their opinions shift, their awareness is limited. If your confidence depends on who claps, your peace will depend on who is watching. But heaven is always watching. The moment you understand that the creator of the universe delights in your steps, human validation begins to lose its grip. You realize that the smile of God outweighs the silence of the crowd. And this is where your perspective must shift. Instead of asking, was it big enough, you begin asking, was it faithful? This single shift will change how you evaluate your days. At the end of today, instead of scanning for visible results, ask yourself, did I obey? Did I align? Did I remain honest? Did I choose courage when fear whispered? Did I show grace when pride wanted control? Because faithfulness is the metric heaven uses. Big is temporary, faithful is eternal. Big impresses people, faithful pleases God. When you measure by faithfulness, discouragement weakens, comparison dissolves, pressure decreases. You stop performing and start aligning, and alignment produces quiet confidence. You begin to walk differently, not louder, not arrogant, but steady. You walk into tomorrow not needing applause to feel secure. You walk into tomorrow knowing that if heaven is pleased, you are positioned. Boldness does not come from noise, it comes from assurance. When you know God is smiling over you, you do not shrink in rooms that once intimidated you. You do not crumble under opinions that once destabilized you. You do not panic when outcomes delay, because your identity is anchored in delight, not performance. Walking boldly into tomorrow does not mean you will feel fearless. It means you will move anyway. It means you will continue taking steps even if your legs tremble. It means you will continue praying even if your voice shakes. It means you will continue believing even if circumstances look unchanged. Boldness is not the absence of vulnerability, it is the presence of conviction. And conviction grows when you internalize this truth when heaven is clapping earth's. Silence does not matter. There may be seasons where your obedience goes unnoticed. There may be moments when people misunderstand your boundaries, question your restraint, or overlook your sacrifice. But heaven is not silent. Heaven records, heaven responds, heaven rejoices. You are not walking alone in an empty field, you are walking in view of eternity. Imagine the throne room, the king seated in authority, angels attentive, the unseen realm alive with awareness. And in the middle of your ordinary Tuesday, you choose integrity, you choose faith, you choose obedience, and heaven reacts. Not with boredom, not with indifference, but with joy. That image must anchor you, because when you feel tempted to quit, you must remember your small yes triggered celebration. When you feel tempted to shrink, you must remember your persistence frustrated darkness. When you feel tempted to measure your value by visibility, you must remember heaven already approved you. So respond by lifting your standard of evaluation. Respond by aligning your questions with heaven's metrics. Respond by refusing to despise the ordinary day. And as we draw this together, let the conclusion settle deeply in your spirit. God saw what you did today. He saw the effort. He saw the trembling faith. He saw the hesitation you pushed through. He saw the prayer you whispered. He saw the moment you resisted quitting. And his reaction was not disappointment. It was joy. You may have looked at your day and thought it was unimpressive. Heaven looked at your day and saw agreement with purpose. Your obedience is shaping eternal outcomes. There are ripple effects forming that you cannot yet trace. There are chains weakening that you cannot yet see. There are doors aligning that you cannot yet perceive. Because obedience is not isolated. It echoes. And I want you to carry this image with you. God smiling, not distant, not neutral, not evaluating you with cold precision, but smiling and saying, "That's my child." That image must become your internal reference point. When insecurity rises, remember the smile. When comparison whispers, remember the smile. When fatigue presses in, remember the smile. Let his joy be your strength, not your performance, not your productivity, not your popularity. His joy, and keep moving forward in faith. Not because you feel extraordinary, not because you have everything figured out, but because you are aligned. If God is smiling over you, your victory is already in motion. It may not be loud yet, it may not be visible yet, but it is unfolding. So walk into tomorrow steady, walk into tomorrow faithful, walk into tomorrow knowing that heaven has already responded to your obedience. And when heaven responds with joy, the outcome is never uncertain.